In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Lord God is one. Amen. Christ is risen. Well, good morning to Christina and Dino and Stella and Anton. It's truly Friday today. And Elizabeth. God bless you all. Well, the weather here is not too bad, actually. It's nice and warm. It's pretty overcast here in Lincoln, but at least it is warm. And even my Terry has gone off fishing, saying that warmth is fine, it's sunshine, the fish don't like it, they won't eat, apparently, when it's sunny. Which I find strange, because the fish in the pond where I'm staying, if it's sunny, they get food, whereas if it's not sunny, they tend not to bother too much. Anyway, there we go. Good morning, Father Alexander, your prayers, is risen indeed. Today, Father Alexander, you can tell your father that I've sent off those letters, so you can stop nagging me about it. Up to the Metropolitan now. Today we're going to be looking at verses 28 through to 32 of chapter 18. So, pin your ears back. Let's see where this takes us. Story so far, of course, is, and it's really rather strange. We begin in verse 24 with it saying, sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. So Annas sends him to his son-in-law, Caiaphas the high priest, and presumably there is another trial there. But John, you'll discover, says nothing whatever about this at all. Okay, so that's quite an interesting little thing. We'll talk about that in a moment. Here we go, verse 28. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium. And it was early morning, but they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out to them and said, What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. Then Pilate said to them, You take him and judge him according to your law. Therefore the Jews said to him, It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. That the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. Okay, so interestingly, John chooses to say nothing whatever about the period with Caiaphas. He loses interest in that. If you want to read all about that, he says, go and look at the synoptics. And if you look at the synoptics, you'll see that quite a lot is said about what happened with Caiaphas. It's almost as if John's saying, you've read all that before, so I'm not going to tell you all that again. Bad things happen, and after bad things happened, Caiaphas takes Jesus, the Lord, to Pilate's residence, which is called the Praetorium. Now, one of the interesting things about the Praetorium is we don't know where it was. We have some ideas where it could have been, and there are a number of different theories. And even the Church Fathers, people like St. Augustine and St. John Chrysostom, have different ideas where it was. The Praetorium need not necessarily be somewhere permanent. So we know, for example, that the governors of Palestine, they had their home down in Caesarea. And Pontius Pilate would only have come to Jerusalem for the feast itself, and then go back again. So it's probable that he set up his headquarters, the Praetorium, where the consul lived, where the praetus lived, as a short-term thing. Several possibilities. All of these are mentioned by different commentators and by some of the Holy Fathers. So, choice number one is that it's Annas' house where Caiaphas also lives. Choice number two is Caiaphas' house, and the governor is actually living there at the moment. That's also possible. That in some annex of Caiaphas' house. Seems a bit unlikely to me, those two, because Have a Gentile coming and staying with you would defile you by itself. The third one, which is more likely, is the fort of Antonia, and that is the traditional one, but only from about the 12th century, the Antonine garrison. From about the 12th century onwards, that was the place where people said Pontius Pilate was, and Gabatha, the court, and everything else comes from about that time. And then the fourth possibility, which I think is quite a good one, is Herod's palace. Now, obviously, Herod's palace would be a place of some luxury, and I can imagine that the Roman governor would like to have some luxury when he stayed up in Jerusalem, rather than stay in a garrison. He would have a few soldiers there to look after him, and staying in Herod's palace would be rather more salubrious than staying in a garrison. So he would have come up from Caesarea sometime earlier on, stayed there. It's early in the morning. The trials often happened shortly after sunrise, and because that was so that you could then dispose of the person straight away after the trial. So get on and do all the trials, crucify those people who are going to be crucified, scourge all those people who are going to be scourged, deal with those people who are not to be dealt with, and still have time for morning coffee. So maybe 6 a.m., maybe a bit earlier, could be even 4 o'clock in the morning. And that means that the trial in front of Caiaphas and Annas is certainly illegal, because it had to happen during the day, and it had to be public, not private. So that is quite important. One of the interesting things about Herod's palace, by the way, is that we know that Pontius Pilate did stay there from time to time. We know also from early Jewish accounts like Josephus that other governors would stay in Herod's palace in Jerusalem. Pilate, for example, had a series of either gold or gold-covered shields put up all around Herod's palace while he was staying there on one occasion, and caused a bit of a problem with the Jews by doing so. Okay, and then we have this wonderful bit of delicious hypocrisy, and I'm going to say again here what I often say, and that is this: that whenever it says something like the Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, scribes, the high priests, and so on, we now stand, especially people like me, stand in those people's shoes, and within the Orthodox Church. And therefore, when you read about these religious people, you're really reading about people just like me. Okay, so here we go. And this is the wonderful, delicious bit of hypocrisy we have here. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So they are perfectly happy to have an illegal trial, and they're perfectly happy to have a judicial murder of somebody they want to get rid of, all at the fast, at the time of the feast, but they're not willing to enter into a Gentile house in case they might find themselves being defiled, and therefore not be able to make all of the sacrifices that will take place over the next few days. And if they entered into the house, they'd be defiled until nightfall, and presumably they had some nice things to get on with back at the temple. So a really most glorious act of hypocrisy. But then clergy all the way down through the ages have been hypocrites. It's one of the things that defines a clergyman, really, the biggest hypocrite in the entire church. Pilate then went out to them and said, that's interesting by itself, isn't it? Pilate goes out, he panders to this desire of theirs not to come into his house. I think I'd have said to them, push off then, you can't be bothered to come in here, go away, don't come in. And he says something that then shocks them. he says, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" He doesn't say, "What has he been found guilty of?" Okay, what accusation do you have? He clearly intends, despite the fact that the high priests have already found him guilty, and despite the fact that he has already sent a detachment of soldiers to go and arrest this man, Pontius Pilate quite clearly intends to try him himself. And that looks as if they were really quite shocked by this, the Jewish people themselves. Okay? They're thinking it's going to be a foregone conclusion. After all, you've got, he's lent them the troops, he's helped them collect this person. Now they bring him to Pilate for the rubber stamp that will allow him to be crucified. So they answer him and say to him, "If you are not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." They make no specific charge, nothing at all. It's a bit like saying, you take, a child to the head teacher, have them thrown out of the school, and say, "Why do you want him thrown out?" Say, "Well, he's always been naughty." That simply is not going to do anything, of course. Okay? And therefore you get that verse 30. I'm a bit shocked by it. And then Pilate says to them, "You take him, and you judge him according to your law." Now, that's interesting on a whole series of fronts there, isn't it? What is Pontius Pilate, doing in Jerusalem? He normally lives in Caesarea. He's up there because there is a major Jewish feast about to happen. And he's probably got lots to do. He has, the Jewish people were notoriously unruly. They were always having little insurrections all over the place. It wasn't the favored job to go off and look after this little area of Palestine, because they're all of them getting up to nonsense all the time and rebelling against the Roman authorities. And the Jews were particularly good about rebelling during the feasts. Lots of people would be there. You'd have preachers who could stir them up, and teachers and hotheads who stir them up and go and kill a few Romans. And Pontius Pilate would have taken a garrison with him, and he was there in Jerusalem, where all the Jews from all over the place were going to come, and he was going to keep an eye on them. So he had more to do that morning than quibble over little matters of Jewish doctrine. So he says to them, "Go and try him yourself. I can't be bothered with this." It should only result in this man being taken to the synagogue and beaten anyway. That's the sort of thing that Pilate would say, and they could do that. They were allowed to get on with that sort of thing. It seems they might have been allowed to do the odd execution, like if a Gentile had turned up within the sanctuary of the temple or the court of the Jews, Jewish men, then they could be executed, and that was allowed. But otherwise, the maximum thing they could do is give the person a good beating. So, what do they say? They say back, "Therefore the Jews said to him, 'It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death.'" Okay? What they're able to fall short of the sentence they want to pass upon him. Only death sentences could be passed on by the Romans, except in the one or two particular occasions. So what happens then? John is making it clear, number one, there's still no viable charge against him. And secondly, he's also trying to make it clear who is ultimately responsible for the Lord's crucifixion. And the answer is then, it is from the Jewish high priest. Okay? It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. So they are begging and pleading Pilate to do that for them. Okay? And that's appropriate, really. It's appropriate that the high priest should do that. It's appropriate that he should be the one, as it were, who wields the sacrificial knife. It was also, it's interesting to say it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. And you might then counter that by saying, well, what about St. Stephen? He was put to death, they stoned him to death, and St. Paul approved of this murder. What we have there probably is a lynch mob who take Stephen out, and before anybody can do anything about it, they have murdered him. Or you might say, what about St. James the Just, who was killed by the Jewish high priest, okay, around about AD 60. Well, that's quite an interesting time, really. Josephus says that they took him out, they stoned him to death as well. And they did so between the reigns of two different governors. So there's an interregnum, and in this interregnum, the high priest saw his opportunity and disposed of James. Now that is interesting, because when the next governor turned up, he heard about this, and the high priest was then punished for it. Okay? So the other thing is, of course, that you can imagine if you allow a subject people to govern and execute whomever they choose and find other people guilty, then they'd be likely to find guilty everybody that works with you. So if you're the Roman governor, you definitely don't want all the Jews to kill off all of your tax collectors, or all the people who work with you. So for another reason, it's the reason why they would not allow those people to be executed. Okay? So we have all those little interesting things going on there. And then it says, verse 32, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. Okay. So Jesus had said several times that he would be lifted up. And when they saw him lifted up, they would see his glorification. This would be his glorification. Now, being lifted up upon the cross was a Roman punishment, and it seems as if being lifted up was the way that people talked about crucifixion, rather like we might say being hanged. In a sense, it was hanged at the jail. If later on you didn't know about these things and somebody said, you'll see, when you see me hanging up high, then you'll know blah, blah, blah. And they say, well, what is this hanging up high? And the same with lifted up. It's another way of saying being crucified. So that's what they have with the idea there. Okay? So Roman punishment, being hanged, being lifted up upon the cross. And this is also important because it means that both the Jews and also the Romans have a hand in this judicial murder, this sacrifice. And therefore the Romans represent all the Gentiles, the Jews obviously represent themselves. So all of humanity is involved in this sacrifice, with the high priest wielding the knife. Okay, that's going to be enough. Look at that, only 19 minutes. Wowee. Let's see what people are saying. John from Melbourne, Australia. Oh dear, what a shame. You've got another lockdown. Hopefully our lockdowns are coming to an end. I've just had my second booster injection, which is why it is actually today I feel like death warmed up. There we go. Okay, yes, pin back your ears, Beverly. Ian, good morning. Christ is risen. Good morning, Melengeth. Yes, Father Alexander, you need to go and Nagpur Sedna. Pray for you both. I always do, of course. Morning, Rob. Almost on time. Great to see us again. Good. God bless you. God bless Wales. Good morning, Alex and Jovan. Father Alexander is talking about hypocrisy. We pray so often in church for our bishops and clergy because we are in need of prayers. The temptation to hypocrisy is so strong, and it's the hypocrites who are judged most severely. That is quite true. The Lord said, to those to whom much is given, much is demanded. And it's very easy, if you're a clergyman, to make little excuses for yourself. But rightfully, other people will not make excuses for you. They look and they see things that are, shall we say, unbefitting the actions and behavior of a cleric, and quite rightly they are disgusted by it. Okay, so a deacon, a priest, a bishop, subdeacon, reader, even an acolyte, somebody or other in the altar. For that matter, all of those people, their behavior must be exemplary within the church. Exactly the same happens to all the people who come to church, with all those people who don't come anywhere near church. I remember there was a man down the road from where my parents lived who borrowed one of his neighbour's saws for cutting up some wood, and he never returned it. And the entire road, you say, oh, there he goes, off to church again. Going to church in England is not normally seen to be a very nice thing to do. There he is, going off to church again, the hypocrite. The one who didn't return his neighbour's saw. So, people then judge severely those people that go to church, also for hypocrisy. And that happens all the time. Now we know that good people don't need to go to church. If you are good, truly good, perfect, then church is no place for you. Church is only there for people who are not good, for people who need to repent, for people who need to have their sins forgiven, and who need to be strengthened through the sacraments so that they might become better, hopefully become holy. And that's the only way really for a Christian to think about everybody else. So every Sunday, maybe 100,000 people go past in this roundabout here, and something round about, on normal times, something around about 80 to 90 come into the church. So we have to remember those 100,000 people, they're the ones who don't need to come to church. Of that I'm sure. They're already pure. Whereas the ones who come to church, like me, are the ones that need to repent. And that is the only way, truly, of thinking about that. Okay? Dino's gone. God bless you. Keep your son in our prayers. Good morning, Graham. Good morning, Ahmed. It was lovely last night. I went to Ahmed's house. We sat in the garden, and in the evening we ate ice cream, which is always something I like to do. First ice cream, actually, I've had for a very long time. It was lovely. And when I got home, I said to myself, I was very quiet today. I hardly said anything. And I was thinking this over this morning about that. And I realized that I was really thoroughly enjoying listening to and watching children playing. And they were playing with mud and with ants and with woodlice and with plants and running around and picking all the flowers and all this sort of thing. And it was absolute pleasure to watch. Okay? So thank you very much indeed, Ahmed and Tom. Is there any historical or other reason why stone to death was approved punishment? I don't know, but certain very serious sins were punishable by being stoned. Certain types of heresy and blasphemy, adultery, and animals could also be stoned to death. So if an animal saw a human being naked, for example, then that animal had to be stoned to death. It also meant that the way of stoning somebody to death, usually you would throw them over some sort of cliff or precipice or wall, and then you pile stones down upon them. It also removes you from the immediateness of killing somebody. So if a crowd of people throw stones at someone, you don't necessarily draw blood, but also who's to tell exactly who it was who killed that person? So with the sin or the fact of killing somebody is then shared in the community. The other thing, of course, is that stones are readily available. They're usually quite big stones. We're talking about large, what Americans will call rocks. So large stones. You throw these things on people. So enough to crash somebody's head. I remember in Afghanistan, when I was growing up, they would half bury somebody in the ground and then pelt them with stones. And the idea of that, actually, they would try and kill them pretty quickly. Horrific, isn't it? Jovan, become angry with your neighbour for making much noise constantly. Well, I lived for a little while next to a primary school, and the kids all come whizzing out at various break times, at mid-morning break, and afternoon break, and lunchtime break. It's hard to know when they actually did any work, squealing their little heads off. And I decided right early on that I could either find this irritating or find it wonderful. And I decided I'd find it wonderful. And I used to thoroughly enjoy it. It's the only way to do it, really. I love the sound of children playing. That's a lovely thing. Good morning, Rami. Christ is risen. God bless you. Yes, even if your weapons are confiscated, there's still stones around. Shukran jazilan, Carl. Okay, well, that's enough for today. Have a good day. Keep me in your prayers, keep each other as well. Yeah, terrible thing. Certainly is, ghastly. It must be a terrifying idea, but actually it's quite quick. This whole business about having a trial and killing people. I lived in Yemen, in Sana'a, for a while. On Friday, on Jummah, before Salat al-Jummah, the judges would meet and they'd condemn the people they're going to condemn, quite a number of them, and they'd sentence them to different sorts of punishments. So some would be eaten by lions, some would be stoned, some would be shot, some would be run over by a truck or dragged to pieces. We're talking about quite a long time ago now. I'm not sure they're still behaving that way now. And if there's a funny side to this, which there isn't really, the funny side was they used to do this immediately after Salat al-Jummah, midday prayers, by tying them up in Freedom Square in the middle of Sana'a and killing them there. And then they'd be loaded onto the back of an old Land Rover. And horses would then, because the Land Rover had no working engine, and the horses would then gallop through the streets to the graveyard. After a while, they decided this was too much of a nuisance. So they'd take the people after Salat and they would make them dig their own grave, lie down in it, then they'd shoot them. I find the whole business of execution just appalling. There we go. Okay, well, God bless you on that horrible note, but more horrors are to come. God willing, Monday. Okay, have a very good weekend. I hope that John will be able to find at least some sort of live streaming that he can watch in Melbourne, and that other people are able to find their way to a church. Here we're beginning to allow a few more people in, fairly strictly, but more and more people are getting, about 45% have had the second jab round here, and over a certain age, and quite young people have had the first one now, so we're able to start opening up in a more meaningful way. I know very well that people very much miss being able to talk and meet each other afterwards as well. Okay, your prayers. God bless you.